I promised to talk about yoga. I talk about yoga and chi therapy. Okay, so this is going to take some time, and I do that because I noticed someone in the comment because last week, remember, we had some technical problem, and I went back and looked at the comment, and it turns out that a young gentleman from India who has been a yoga teacher for 10 years, a gentleman by the name of Aluk. And I'll post his profile if I could do it on a circle so you can go take a look at his classes. And he joined us. And so I felt that it was the right time now to talk about the relationship between what we do here, what I call chi therapy, and yoga, or more precisely, yuj, yuja, right? In Chinese, it's actually translated as yuja because it came from the North Indian word. It didn't come from the English word. This is a long story, I told you, huh? And then when we finish, then we do meditation. And then we do chanting as well. So let me start with mindfulness. I think I told this story before, but let's tell it again. Let me tell it again just to be complete. So often we talk about mindfulness, and everybody talks about mindfulness now. And often it's misinterpreted. And so you need to go back to the original language. And the original language in Pali is sati, S-A-T-I. That's mindfulness. Now, when you look it up, you realize that sati is the name of a goddess in India. So what does mindfulness has to do with this goddess? Well, the story was that back in the old days in North India, where there were little kingdoms, there was a kingdom, a small one, with a king and a queen who had everything. They had sons, they had wealth, their citizens were happy. Everything they wanted, they have it. The only thing they don't have is they don't have a daughter. So they really, really wanted a daughter. So they went to this goddess in front of the statue. And they says, we have done everything that we were asked. We took care of our people, we took care of family. But there's still one thing that we like to have, which is that we want to have a daughter. This goddess respond to them and says, yeah, I can be your daughter. I will come and incarnate as your daughter. But you have to make me a promise, which is you would never disrespect me. So the king and the queen says, yes. So of course the goddess reincarnated and they were given a daughter. And they loved this daughter. They loved her. Unfortunately, as she grew up, she didn't care about any of the wealth, any of the trapping of a rich life that the king and the queen can offer. Instead, she wanted to learn meditation and she became a spiritual practitioner. And she fell in love with a god by the name of Shiva. You know that. And eventually married to Shiva. So the king and the queen were furious because Shiva was a ascetic. He was a beggar, very low rank in the society, so they didn't care for him. One time, the king was celebrating his birthday, and he didn't invite his daughter because it was disgraceful. But the daughter came anyway. He came up to the throne and says, you have disrespected me because you have disrespected my husband. And I told you, and you had made a promise that you would never disrespect me, because if you do, you would lose everything. Then he got up and he jumped into the fire and went back to the heaven, became a goddess again. So Sati is her name, and Sati is the practice. And Sati became the word that the historical Buddha used to represent remembrance. Just remember. That's all it means. Just remember. Keep checking your mind. Remember to put your mind on your body any part of your body, the center of your palm, the shoulder, the wrist, the elbow, any part of the body when you're in motion. When you walk, focus on the bottom of your feet. When you wash dishes, focus on your hands. Be mindful of your body when you're in motion. Be mindful of your breath when you're stationary, whether you're sitting, you're standing, you're lying down. Focus on your breath. That's what mindfulness means. Now, sati, after he jumped into, by the way, sati is also the name of this ritual that is illegal now, where a widow, after the husband had died, was jumped into fire. They cremate the body, and she was jumped into the fire. Now, historically, it's because widows were given very, very low social status in North India back in the old days. So the women would rather die than to live like a widow. That practice is also called sati. So anyway, she went back and become a goddess, and then eventually married to Shiva again and became her second wife, and her name is Parvati. Parvati was very famous because Parvati was actually Shiva's first student. Until then, Shiva had no interest in teaching. So she was the one that actually took Shiva's teaching and propagated. And Shiva is known as the Adi Yogi, the original yogi. Everyone that comes after that is his disciple, including the historical Buddha. So what did Adi Yogi teach, and what was Parvati's learning? Shiva talked about our existence, and he talks about the existence as 5 bodies, one on top of each other, as if the onion, one skin after another. The very outer body is the material body. This body of ours comes from the fruit that we consume. If I take a banana, it's a banana before I consume it. And after I consume it, becomes my body. And if I stop consuming, the body would disappear. So this outer body, the one that we are so focused on, is just the outer layer that has to do with our 5 senses: the eye, the nose, the tongue, the ear, and the body. And the artificial boundary that we put on that we call our body is the extent of these 5 senses. We can't see beyond our body. We can't hear, feel beyond our body. That's why we call it a body. And it's just a consequence of our consuming food. It's just part of the world. It's actually what we borrow from the world that we one day return. That's the very first layer. That's just the material body. The one beneath that is called the mental body. The mental body is, now in the Buddhist teaching, is also part of we have called the 6th sensor. So the 6th sensor is part of the brain, right? But in the yogic teaching, it's not the brain, it's the entire intelligence of a body. And they differentiate between intellect and intelligence. Whereas in Western culture, we focus almost predominantly on intellect and pretty much forgot about the rest of the intellectual system, intelligence system. The brain is the intellect. That's only one part. The rest of it, the spiral cord, is an important part. In fact, one would argue that every single cell in the body has intelligence. But of course, all of them comes together, all the nerve endings come together in the spiral cord. And then from the spiral cord, it delivers that integrated information onto the brain. That is called the mental body. Now, both of which are physical. So when you die, they're gone. The third layer inside of that is what the Adi Yogi call the energy body. This is the energy body. So in fact, when a yogi practice, they're practicing emancipation. They're practicing giving up the desire, the return to that third body, the energy body. Now, what Adi Yogi said is that in the body, there are these energy channels. There's 74,000 energy channels, 32,000 on the left, 32,000 on the right. And this energy channel comes together And now we cut to the part that is famous, everybody knows. When the energy line comes together, it's called a chakra. And there's 114 of those in our body. 2 of those outside the body, the rest of it inside the body. And if you could find one of those chakra, then that's the opening into another world. And so in that sense, the historical Buddha, which is a disciple of Shiva, who figured out his way. And his way is called awakening. Now, of course, the big contribution of the historical Buddha wasn't just the discovery, but was that after he discovered, he came back and he systematized the teaching, starting with mindfulness to samatha to vipassana to all of that. So it becomes a very, very systematic set of teaching. That's what he did. But fundamentally, he was a teacher. He was a student of Adiyogi, that he was a yogi himself. Now, of course, out of the 114 or 112 chakra, we're most familiar with the 7, which starts at the very bottom of the upper torso, travel up the spine, all the way up. And the last one is actually above the head. We all know about that, or at least read about it, right? So what does that have to do with what we do? Well, again, the teaching from Adiyogi was passed down for many, many years, something that some people think that is at least 6,000 years, if not 60,000. Nobody really know, but it's passed on. Until 2,600 years ago, we have the original Buddha who learned it, who then turned it into his way of teaching. Then he passed on, and he passed on to his student, one at many students now, right? And then they go all over the place. Some of them went to Burma, some of them went to China, some of them went to even Afghanistan, some of them went as far as Greece. Anyway, Bodhidharma came along, and he was a 28th disciple of the historical Buddha, and he decided to travel to China. And he was a yogi too, and he taught what he learned from this chain, starting with the historical Buddha, and he taught that to the Chinese. Now, the Chinese took that teaching, the idea of the material body, the mental body, the energy body, and by the way, there's more, right? So the 4th body is a transition from physical to metaphysical, and then finally, the most inner core is called the bliss body. And when we do meditation today, we're gonna tap into that bliss. They took that teaching to China, and they merged it with our own culture, which has to do with astrology, because the Chinese are very interested in astrology many thousands of years ago, because the Chinese has an emperor who considered himself the son of God, son of heaven. And so it was very important for the emperor, in order to retain his power, to get a better understanding of the universe, which is in complete opposite of the Western culture. The Western culture didn't learn about astrology until much later, until Galileo, because until then, the Western culture were in the dark period, right? You remember that. It was beginning of the Renaissance that they understand, and that's not. But the Chinese understood astrology a long time ago, and they understand the influence of the sun, because we live in the solar system, and they understand the influence of the planets that in the absence of the sun. So when they took that teaching, the 74,000 energy lines, they start to merge it with their understanding of how we live in the solar system, how our energies is affected by the sun and by the absence of sun. And they start to take that energy body and they start to talk about how energy flows in us in a continuous loop, 24 hours a day. 2 hours in this energy line called the liver, 2 hours in the energy line called the gallbladder. The yang is when it flows out to the extremities. The yin is when it returns back to the center of the body. And they discover these 12 tripullaries, these 12 secondary energy lines that makes up the 24-hour day. They discover another 8 energy lines that are primary energy line, 2 of which we study. One is called the governing, and one is called the conception. All the yang energy travels to the top of the head, all the yin energy travels to the bottom of the torso. So the Chinese have a different interpretation of these 74,000 energy lines, or the North Indian called Nadi. And the Chinese have a different interpretations of the 7 chakras, or the 114 chakras. And they discover these energy points along the energy lines. And initially, these 356 correspond to 356 days of the year. And now there are more and more discovery, which are outside of the meridians. But in any way, I just want you to know that what I call the chi therapy comes from the traditional yogic practice, that we are one of the same, not two of different things. It's just a different interpretation, right? When that idea, when that philosophy, when that technology came to China, it had to be localized, and localized with our understanding of astrology, our understanding of how our body behaves in the solar system. That's all.